Underrot is a dungeon from Battle for Azeroth that Blizzard have brought back for Season 2 of Mythic Plus in Dragonflight. This dungeon has a 30-minute timer, so as long as you complete the dungeon within that window, you will upgrade your key. As you start the key, you will encounter 6 different trash mobs on the way towards the first boss, Elder Leaxa. First, you will notice some smallies on either side of the room in packs of 5 called Underrot ticks. But don't be fooled by their low amounts of health, as they can be pretty deadly to your tank with the Bloodmort bleed debuff they apply. But most importantly, they can easily wipe your group as they all explode upon death, dealing shadow damage to the entire group via Bloodburst, so you'll definitely want to use a defensive here or at least stagger their deaths in higher keys. One of the next mobs you'll encounter is the Fetid Maggot. These mobs are pretty easy to deal with, just either stun or sidestep their Rotten Bile ability, which is a frontal cone they direct at a random player. Speaking of frontals, the Chosen Blood Matron will dash at a random player and then cast a Savage Cleave that again you'll simply want to move out of. It also casts a 100% haste buff on nearby enemies through Warcry that can be dispelled via a Soothe ability, so make sure you do that if your class allows and focus the matron down as this is uninterruptible. Also, make sure that you're not pulling this mob onto big packs on higher keys because that buff will prove difficult to deal with. Headhunters will root a random player for 4 seconds that does ticking damage to them, so you'll want to pop a defensive or freedom ability here. They also throw barb spears at players and have a habit of all targeting the same player, so be prepared. Blood Priest will spam cast Blood Bolt at random players. Kick this where you can, but it's a very low priority as you'll want to save your kicks for Dark Reconstitution. A big heal on a low health trash mob nearby, and also Gift of Gahoon, which increases a trash mob's damage by 100% and also prevents death for 25 seconds. Make sure to kick both of these abilities or at least soothe the Gift of Gahoon if it does go off. After clearing this trash, you'll pick your side of the bridge to go down. Here you'll deal with more Headhunters, Chosen Blood Matrons and Blood Priests, but this time you'll also find Befouled Spirits here. These spirits will target a random player, dealing damage to them and also anyone within 4 yards for 6 seconds. You can't kick this cast, so just spread out while fighting this mob for an easier time. You will, however, definitely want to kick Harrowing Despair, as this will deal massive AoE damage and probably wipe your group if it does go off. After clearing this bridge, you'll come to the first boss, Elder Leaxa. Whenever players take damage in this fight, they will gain a debuff, Taint of Gahoon. This debuff will deal ticking damage and absorb a set amount of healing until the absorb is out healed. Leaxa will spam cast Blood Bolt on the tank that can be interrupted and is the only cast in the fight, so you may want to set up a kick rotation here. She will also occasionally turn and cast Creeping Rot at a random player. This sends out a slow green orb that you'll want to dodge. You'll also need to dodge the boss when she teleports to a random player and casts Sanguine Feast. And finally, Leaxa's signature ability is Blood Mirror. She will summon a copy of herself that will again cast Blood Bolt and Sanguine Feast until it is killed. As soon as it spawns, your tank should drag Leaxa over to the copy and your group should quickly kill the ad while still cleaving on the boss. Onwards to Cragmaw, you'll find more blood ticks and fetid maggots that you encountered at the start of the dungeon, as well as some new enemies you'll have to take out. Feral Blood Swarmers will fixate on a random player for 15 seconds. You'll want to use CC to slow and stop the Blood Swarmers from connecting with their target, as they will absolutely demolish their fixated target. They also cast Sonic Screech, an interruptible cast that will deal a burst of physical damage and also interrupt anyone casting within 45 yards. You'll definitely want to assign a kick to this ability. Living Rots cast Wave of Decay, which spawns a pool of decay and will deal damage to players stood in it, so just avoid the pools. They will also mark the location of a random player and send out a foul sludge bolt that you should move away from to avoid taking any damage. The final mobs you'll encounter here are also arguably the scariest. They have an interruptible cast called Decaying Mind that will apply a 30-second stun to a target and also absorbs a set amount of healing. This is the highest priority kick in this area, and I'd advise pulling as few of these at a time as you can. It can be dispelled or out healed, but you don't even want to take the risk, so just make sure you kick it. You want to clear as much of this room as you can before you start the encounter with Cragmaw, because believe me, you'll want the space. While fighting Cragmaw, each of its abilities will spawn a bunch of lava on the ground nearby, so ideally you'll want to pull him to the side of the room and stack up relatively nearby. After 8 seconds, these lava will then turn into blood ticks, which behave the same as the trash blood ticks we've already encountered, applying a stacking tank debuff and also exploding upon death. You can stop this transformation though by simply running over them. This is your highest priority in this fight, as this is definitely what will cause you to wipe if too many turn into ticks. The tank will want to permanently face the boss away from the group during the fight because of Cragmaw's frontal ability, Indigestion. Tank should pop a defensive for this and quickly squish the lava that spawns out of the the breath. The rest of your group will want to position themselves in between Crag and a nearby wall so that when it targets a random player and charges, the distance is as short as possible and the lava will spawn closer together, making them easier to squish. Just make sure you dodge the charge. At 100% energy, Cragmaw will cast its signature ability Tantrum, dealing AoE damage to players and stomping randomly around the room, spawning lava everywhere. During this phase, you'll want to pop defensives and run around squishing all the bugs before they transform. It is unlikely that you'll be able to deal with all of them, but the more you squish the better because your tank won't fall over and you won't die to their explosions once you kill them. Rinse and repeat in this fight until the boss is dead. Good luck. Once Cragmaw is down, the next mobs you'll encounter are reanimated guardians. They cast Bone Shield on themselves, which absorbs incoming damage, so you'll want to kick this or dispel it if the cast does go off. Aside from this, the guardians don't have any other abilities, though their melee attack damage is higher than most in the instance, so tanks should prepare accordingly. In this pack, you'll also find a Fallen Death Speaker. They will cast Wicked Frenzy, a 12-second enrage buff which increases nearby allies' haste and movement speed by 100%. You'll want to kick or CC this cast. Healers will want to dispel Wicked Embrace, placing a 12-second dot on a random player. As you move through this area, you'll find grotesque horrors that are burrowed underground until you move closer to them. You'll see the ground rumbling where they are positioned, and once engaged with, they will repeatedly cast Void Spit. Kick this ability as it will inflict shadow damage to a random player. They will also channel Dark Echoes, dealing pulsing AoE damage to your party, so save a kick for this too, but do note that they are also stunnable. Bloodsworn Defilers are also found generally around the horrors. These mobs are super dangerous, so pull them with caution. They will channel an AoE ability called Withering Curse that will reduce the party's damage by 10%, but also increase the damage you take by 10%, stacking as the channel continues. You'll want to kick instantly on this, and also the Shadow Bolt Volley, which deals heavy AoE damage, and they also spawn a Spirit Drain Totem that you'll want to stay clear of when it spawns, otherwise it'll probably one-shot you. Sporecaller Zancha is the third boss in the Underrot. Mushrooms spawn around this encounter that you'll need to destroy with his other abilities, otherwise they'll explode when the boss reaches 100% energy and casts his signature ability Festering Harvest. This deals big AoE damage as well as applying a stackable dot for every mushroom not cleared to all players. If there are still mushrooms up while he casts Festering Harvest, one player, preferably with an immunity, should run around and clear the remaining mushrooms so only they get the dot on them instead of the whole party. Needless to say, they should pop every defensive under the sun for this one and pray. Tanks can destroy the mushrooms by facing the boss towards as many mushrooms as possible for Zancha's Shockwave ability. Other players should keep an eye out and avoid the area where the tank is facing the boss so that they don't get one-shot by the Shockwave. Zancha will also mark 2 non-tank players with Upheaval. They should go and stand themselves amongst a pack of mushrooms, and after 6 seconds run out so the Upheaval destroys the shrooms but doesn't hit them. Shortly after the Upheaval cast, the boss will cast Volatile Pods that will spawn big red mushrooms around the room. Players should avoid standing near these big mushrooms once they spawn, as they will explode and release spores that travel across the room. If you do come into contact with any of these spores, you'll gain a stack of decaying spores. The encounter will repeat, as once he blows up the shrooms, he'll spawn new ones, so just keep on top of them and you should be fine. Once the boss dies, you can progress towards the last boss. The group will encounter more grotesque horrors and Bloodsworn Defilers here, as well as more reanimated guardians and their Fallen Death Speaker friends. A lot of this trash can be skipped by certain pathing around the room, but do note that you may need it for your enemy forces count in Mythic Plus. There is, however, one more type of mob we'll have to face in this dungeon. Faceless Corruptors patrol this area and are mostly skippable except the last 2 guarding the entrance to the last boss. They have 2 uninterruptible casts, the first one being Maddening Gaze, which will deal a burst of shadow damage and fear anyone stood within the cone in front of the Corruptor. It's a very long cast of 4 seconds, so you should easily be able to sidestep it, and the second cast is Abyssal Reach, spawning multiple tentacles around the Corruptor, and they will hit nearby players. Move away from these tentacles and get your tank to kite away from them so your melee can keep uptime on the mobs. After you clear this area, the Titan Keeper will remove the webbing and you can fly down to the last boss, the final boss of the Underrot, the Unbound Abomination. This boss doesn't actually take direct damage from players, instead damage on the boss will fill up his energy bar. At 100% energy, he will spawn 2 Blood Visage adds. These adds do not have any special abilities and will melee whoever has threat on them, so tanks will want to make sure to pick them up. Killing these mobs will deal 17% max health damage to the boss, so DPS will want to make sure they are swapping to these. This means that you only have to kill 6 of these visages. While fighting and kiting this boss around the room, you'll want to be positioned on the wall side so that when he targets a random player with Vile Expulsion, he'll spew this corruption towards the wall instead of all over the encounter room. As soon as this cast begins, all players should sidestep out of the way to avoid incoming damage. The breath will leave pools on the ground that would deal ticking damage to anybody stood inside it. Occasionally, they will spawn into rotting spores traveling towards the group. If they reach a player, they will explode for massive damage and reform back into a pool on the ground, so you'll constantly want to AoE these down before they reach your group. The Abomination will also apply a putrid blood magic dot to your entire party. This can be dispelled, however the Titan Keeper will occasionally cast Cleansing Light on a player that will cleanse the debuff off of anyone within 10 yards of the targeted player, and this will also remove any pools on the ground nearby. All players should try and enter this zone to keep your putrid blood stacks to a minimum. He also helps to kill the visage and dealing substantial damage to them so you can focus more of your damage into the other one. But that's all you need to know for this encounter, and that wraps up the Underrot in Mythic Plus. If this guide did help you out, then please drop a like down below and subscribe to your boy. And until next time, I'll catch you guys later.